The Bible is generally not considered a very funny book, but like any good dramatic story, there's gonna be some comic relief. In this episode, we're gonna be doing the top 10 funniest and craziest stories from the Bible. For example, Samson, the really strong guy, his life is so crazy, he's in the top 10 twice. But more on him later. So not wasting any time on this one, let's jump right in at number 10, Jesus' birth year. Our entire calendar is built around when Jesus was born. In the 6th century, a monk, Dionysius, was assigned with finding out when Jesus was born so that the calendar can be built around when he was born. So he did all the research and found out when Jesus was born, and hence we have our calendar today. But here's the funny thing. Dionysius was wrong. Jesus was not born in the year 0 like you'd expect. He was actually born 6 BC.
Somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985.
Yes, you heard me right. Jesus Christ was born 6 years before Jesus Christ was born. They discovered this error many years after the calendar was already put in place, so they never went back and fixed it. But now that I think about it, being born 6 years before you were born seems like a Jesus thing to do. All right, moving on to number 9, the fig tree. This story can be found in Matthew 21 as well as Mark 11. Jesus was walking with his disciples when he stumbled on a fig tree. And Jesus was very hungry, so he reached into the tree to pull out a fig to eat. And shortly after, he learned that this fig tree did not have any figs for him to eat.
Ouch! What do you think you're doing?
So instead of moving on to another fig tree, he curses that tree so that it will never bear fruit ever again. Now look, I know that we all say things that we don't mean when we're really hungry, but come on, Jesus, this seems a little extreme. Now, if you actually do a deep dive in this passage, just like I do in this episode, you'll know that this was actually a symbolic act and not because Jesus was hungry. But still, pretty funny that Jesus curses a fig tree. Now moving on to number 8, the foxes. Now this is the first time that Samson appears on our top 10 list, and this story can be found in Judges 15. And here's how the story goes. Samson goes home to his wife and he wants to sleep with her. Now instead of being able to do so, his father-in-law stops him. His father-in-law explains to him that he thought that Samson was no longer interested in his daughter, so he gave his daughter to someone else. The father-in-law then says, "You can have one of my other daughters instead," but Samson isn't having any of it. And yes, Samson could figure this out with his father-in-law, maybe have some constructive conflict, but that's not really Samson's style. Instead, he goes out and he catches 300 foxes.
What does the fox say?
Yes, he catches 300 individual foxes. And then, 2 by 2, he ties their tails together around a lit torch. And then he releases these pairs of foxes in the fields throughout the Philistines' land. As you can imagine, the foxes run around like crazy, like their tails are tied together, and it burns a ton of the Philistines' crops. And look, I know your father-in-law giving away your wife is incredibly depressing, but that still seems like an overreaction. Now, of course, the Philistines weren't thrilled about all of their crops being burned, so they went to Samson's father-in-law and wife and burned them to death. So who got the last laugh? I'm not sure. And this isn't even the craziest Samson story in this list, but more on that later. Moving on to number 7, the donkey. Now this story can be found in the book of Numbers, chapter 22. There's this guy named Balaam who is riding on his donkey down the road, and his donkey stops for a peculiar reason. Now we know from reading the text that the donkey actually saw an angel, but Balaam could not see the angel. So in Balaam's mind, his donkey just stops for no reason. So Balaam whips his donkey for stopping. But the donkey would not move forward, so Balaam whips him again. And then he whips him again. Yes, this is a very rough situation for this poor donkey. So what does the donkey do? The donkey looks up at Balaam and says, "Hey, stop whipping me." You know, like any donkey would do.
It's no wonder you don't have any friends.
Wow. Only a true friend would be that truly honest.
And in my mind, this donkey had the voice of Eddie Murphy, but Maybe that's a pipe dream. All right, moving on to number 6, the Fat King. And this story can be found in Judges chapter 3. Now, setting the scene here, there was a king of the Moabites called Eglon. And at this point in history, the Israelites had been conquered by the Moabites, so this king Eglon was a big problem. Now, an Israelite judge named Ehud wanted to solve this problem. He hatched a plan to assassinate this Moabite king. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, this Moabite king, Eglon, is incredibly fat.
Get in my belly!
So the judge Ehud, in a meeting with this Moabite king, takes a hidden sword and stabs him in the belly.
Belly!
So this king was so fat that his entire sword went into his belly, as well as his entire handle, so much so that Ehud had to leave his sword in the king altogether. And the crazy thing is that this king was so fat that when his servants came to check on him, they didn't even know that he was dead. They thought he was just pooping.
I got a crap on deck that could choke a donkey. Wow.
Which is really convenient for Ehud, who used that time to escape. And that is literally the only time the Bible talks about how fat somebody is. Hilarious. All right, we've got to the top 5 now, but before I jump into the top 5, I just want to remind you that we are launching a new segment on this show that's called Learn the Bible in a Year. Have you ever wanted to read the entire Bible cover to cover in 1 year? On this show, we have developed a Bible reading plan where you will read the entire Bible in 1 year. You will also have daily podcast episodes that gives a recap of the daily readings. You can also capitalize on a free workbook that gives you the daily reading as well as engaging questions. The digital version of this workbook is free, but you can also purchase the paperback version if you wish to. The link to both of those are in the description. All right, now we are at number 5. Check the small print. All right, we're back to a Samson story again, and this story is found in Judges chapter 14. So Samson is at a banquet with a bunch of Philistines. This in and of itself is kind of funny because Samson famously hates the Philistines, and the Philistines hate Samson, but yet they're at some banquet together. And Samson makes a wager with the Philistines. He tells them a riddle, and he says, if you can solve this riddle in 7 days, I will give you 30 pieces of new clothing. But if you cannot solve it, you must give me 30 pieces of clothing. The Philistines can't figure out the answer to Samson's riddle, so they secretly go to Samson's wife, who's also a Philistine, and ask her what the answer to the riddle is. So Samson's wife gives the answer to the Philistines, and the Philistines win this wager over Samson. And this is why I said that you needed to read the fine print when making a wager with Samson. Instead of Samson going out and buying 30 pieces of clothes to pay for this wager that he lost, instead he goes and kills 30 Philistines, likely the comrades of the people he made the bet with, took their clothes and used that as payment.
What is this? Those are IOUs. Go ahead and add it up. Every cent's accounted for.
And you might be thinking to yourself, why is Samson so angry at the Philistines when it's in fact his wife that betrayed him? But don't be too disheartened. It's the next chapter where she and her father are burned to death. So she gets what's coming to her. Moving on to number 4, Golden Delicious. And this story is found in Exodus chapter 32. Moses, who is talking to God and receiving the 10 Commandments, is coming back from the Mount Sinai. Now, when he gets back, all the Israelites are worshiping a golden calf that they built. First of all, it's kind of funny that literally millions of people all agree together that they should worship a statue of a cow. But that's not the funny part of this story. The funny part of this story is what Moses does when he finds out what they've done. As you can imagine, Moses is furious with the Israelites for doing this, so he burns the golden statue to the ground, and he takes the gold dust and mixes it with water and makes the Israelites drink it.
I like that.
And look, I understand the concept of disciplining a nation when they do something horrendous like this, but this seemed a little bit weird and unusual and funny. But unfortunately for Moses, this disciplinary tactic did not work because the Israelites continued to make idols and worship them forever. All right, moving into the top 3 now. At number 3, we have Naked Noah. Now, we all remember Noah from the Noah and the Ark story, but there's another story right after that story that's not typically shared in Sunday school. After the flood was over and Noah and his family landed on ground again, Noah planted a vineyard, and then he took the grapes in that vineyard and made some wine. He drank that wine and became incredibly drunk, took all of his clothes off, and laid down. Now, while he was laying there drunk and naked, one of his sons walked by. This is the son Ham.
Hormel makes Cure 81 hams only one way, dependable.
So when Ham saw his naked father, he literally made fun of him for it. It wasn't until later Ham's other brothers came and covered Noah up. So later, when Noah sobered up, he actually cursed his son Ham and all of his future generations, which is no small deal. Out of Ham's lineage, we get the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites, all of which were the enemies of God's chosen people, the Israelites. You know how some people say that they got drunk and then made the worst decision of their life? Well, in Ham's case, his father got drunk and he made the worst decision of his life. All right, moving on to number 2, Hairless Wonder. Now, this story takes place in 2 Kings chapter 2. Now, the famous prophet Elijah has just ascended into heaven, and to replace Elijah is Elisha, the prophet. Very similar names, two different people. Now, Elisha was walking along, and he was then surrounded by a bunch of teenagers. And these teenagers started making fun of him. They mocked him and ridiculed him and called him some horrendous names. Now, for those of you with sensitive ears or have children listening, now might be the time to cover your ears. The teenagers said to Elijah, "Go up, you bald head."
Inconceivable!
And Elisha wasn't thrilled about this, so he curses those teenagers, and then 2 female bears come out of the woods and maul the teenagers to death. Yep, it's the classic make fun of a bald guy and then 2 female bears maul you to death story. And now we've got number 1, long-winded preacher. This is the funniest and one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. If you've liked this top 10 list, make sure you hit that subscribe and like button. I really appreciate it. Now, this story takes place in Acts chapter 20, and the apostle Paul is preaching to a group of people in an upper room. Now, he starts preaching in the morning, and he preaches all day long up until midnight. You know how sometimes you're at church and you feel like the pastor should, wrap it up? He's taking a little long. Well, we have no place to complain. Paul has been preaching here for like 12 to 18 hours straight. Now, one of the people listening to Paul preach was a young man named Eutychus. And Paul preached for so long that Eutychus fell asleep and fell out the window all the way to the ground and died. Now, that is hilarious. But what happens next is even more hilarious. Paul takes this young man and raises him back to life.
But just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead.
Inconceivable.
Which is awesome. And then Paul preaches for 6 more hours. A guy falls out a window and dies. Just a small detour. Now, where was I in my sermon? Thank you so much for tuning into the top 10 funniest and craziest stories in the Bible. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel and watch some more of my content. I've got a lot of it. You can check out this video right here if that tickles your fancy. But until the next episode, Jesus loves you, and shalom, shalom.